and welcome to this episode of the Cold Start Corner Expert Series. I'm Eric Matei, joined by Dr. Nathan McClain, where we are gonna peel back that onion that is managed care and how to manage vision plans in your practice, in your Cold Start. Dr. McClain, thank you so much for joining us here on the Cold Start Corner.
Thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
So look, I know we have a lot to get into. So let's go ahead and step right into it and talk first and foremost about the role that vision plans do still play in private practice, and perhaps you can share in the context of that some of your experience as a practice owner and early on in your years in practice ownership, discovering how to work with these vision plans.
Yeah, I mean, it started out early on. So I purchased my first practice in 2008, and it was kind of a managed vision care was definitely gaining more of a stronghold right around that time. And to be honest, a lot of it in the beginning, there's a lot of things I had no idea about vision care in dealing with when eligibility should be determined from the time they schedule to the time they show up, and then understanding their benefits. And there's such a learning curve in our industry for understanding managed vision care, and that's from that kind of whole process through of understanding the eligibility, the benefits, and then how to apply those benefits. And so there was a lot of struggles early on in doing that, and then I got to the point to where I stepped away from seeing patients and was managing the practice, and that was a whole nother perspective to see all of the kind of the trials and tribulations that my staff was going through dealing with managed vision care.
Sure. So on that note, let's dig into the standard operating procedures, right? Because we can talk all day about the vision plans and how they work, and or are you best on them or are you best to ditch them? But all of that aside, let's talk to that doctor who is ready to cold start or purchase a practice, and vision plans will be a part of the practice. Walk us through the standard operating procedures that they should have in place to ensure that vision plans can be an asset to the practice.
For sure. I mean, in most cases, it's going to start with the phone call of a patient calling in to schedule, and roughly about half of the adult population has managed vision care, so it's a very common thing. But what's also very common is about 50% of the time when patients call in, they know they have vision insurance, but they don't have any idea who it's through. And so,
Okay.
one of the first hurdles that happens at that point is then the staff has to search multiple portals who their providers through, trying to determine, one, who is this patient's vision insurance through, and then two, what's their actual eligibility and benefits. And so this is kind of the first pain point in that process of, does the staff keep the patient on for that phone call to try and get the eligibility and benefits right at that time, or because of they have all these different sites they have to search to figure this out, do they determine it at a later point? And so this is a big thing, when you're talking about the cold starts and different people and trying to really figure out what's the best practice flow. And in my opinion, it's really trying to get all of that initial information at that call, figuring
Sure.
out who's their insurance through and what's their actual eligibility benefits, which is a lot of times, a lot of practices is a failure point because they're not getting it at that initial call. Because some of the problems involved with not getting it at that initial call is then the staff has to remember at a later time, I've got to, go back in and figure out who their insurance is through and what's their eligibility. And they write that down, and as soon as they get off the phone, they think they're going to do it, and then another patient calls or another patient comes in. So they're always pulled in different directions. But so then you have the opportunity just to even forget to verify that information. And then two, if they do go back in and verify it, then lo and behold, if a patient's not eligible, then the staff's spending even more time trying to reach back out to the patient. And then that leads to a whole host of problems of just wasted time and playing the telephone game back and forth. And then in a lot of my experience, if staff leaves a voicemail like, "Oh, Mrs. Smith, we ran your plan and we found out that you're eligible for frames, but you're not eligible for an exam at this point. Give us a call back and we can discuss it." Well, a lot of times a patient's going to hear that over the phone, and they might just not even go to their appointment then. They'll be like, oh, I'm not eligible for an exam. I'm just not even going to come in. They never call the office. So then you have a no-show. And so there's
Right.
all these complications that arise just from that initial call and how it's handled.
You're
Oh,
like half the
I,
adult population have a vision plan.
yeah, half the adult population has managed vision care.
Okay. And then what you shared is that it's not uncommon for the patient to be scheduling the appointment and the patient is like, yeah, I have a vision plan, but as far as who that plan is through and what the benefits look like, that's where it's the Wild West. And when you're talking about then the staff has your team has to manually go and search all of the different portals.
Right.
Wow, that's insane. That's insane.
Yeah, and if you think about it, because one of the reasons is a lot of times they're not actually given a vision card. Their employer, gets an insurance plan for employees. Let's say that's through Blue Cross Blue Shield, but then Blue Cross Blue Shield will contract one of the vision care. So it could be, IMED or someone like that. But a lot of times patients never even have a card of their actual vision insurance. They have their initial packet when they were hired, or once a year they get a folder. That's really all they have. So the majority of the time they don't even know who their vision insurance is through unless they've just been, an employee long enough that they remember what they use every year.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. And I think in the context of this, it's also important to point out, look at this in the context of the day-to-day operations of the practice, right? Because it's not like that staff member who's fielding that call, talking to patient Smith, getting them taken care of, scheduling them, what have you. It's not like that's the only thing that is on their plate. Because as they're having this conversation, they're also seeing perhaps a patient walk up to the counter, perhaps a patient presenting out of clinic, ready to go into the optical. And then we start looking at, and we all know the golden rule. Um, Answering the phone, serving on the phone is very important, but serving bodies that are there in the practice is number one priority. So it's important to consider also. I mean, if you've got, say, 4 or 5 vision plans that have a presence in your geographic area, then again, at any given time, that could be upwards of those 4 different portals that staff is having to dig into. It's also fascinating what you said as far as the potential collateral damage of the process on the patient side, right? Where the patient then may be ill-informed or learns that they've got some weird, funky combination of benefits, which we're seeing increasingly more and more, right? Where these
Correct.
plans are just difficult to read and understand. I mean, oh my gosh.
Yeah.
And that can certainly complicate things. So, okay, so we pick back up in the journey of the team member, right? If I'm the team member fielding that call, well, I'm on the call with you and you're the patient trying to schedule with me. I may be trying to bounce around 4, 6, 8 different portals trying to figure out, oh my gosh, what does this person have? Or they realize, I don't have time to do this right now. Hey, let me take down your info. Okay. So what happens then? How often is staff able to tend to it versus patient presenting day of? It's like, oh my gosh, we never pulled their bennies and we're having to do a day of. How do you see that breakdown?
Oh, yeah, I know how it breaks down, and I've been there, and it's painful. I mean, because people are taking time out of work to come in, and the worst possible scenario is that patient that shows up that's not eligible. And there's so many things, depending on the different flows, like a patient will show up, and sometimes the patient will even show up and they'll be like, oh, we forgot to verify their benefits. Okay, we'll go ahead and look at that. Well, why they start looking at it, they might start doing the workup on the patient. So then there's nothing worse than you've already started the process and you have to walk in, an exam room and be like, oh, Mrs. Smith, I'm sorry, we're not eligible. Would you like to go ahead and be seen? Then their first question is, well, how much is that going to cost? And then, depending on the exam prices, and then you have a scenario that nobody wants, and that can be a very uncomfortable scenario, and it becomes a lose. It's a poor patient experience, and the odds of that patient wanting to come back are going to be extremely minimal, really, and trying to prevent that scenario is the worst. And let's say it's not even that bad, that the patient shows up and they haven't verified those benefits, but then there just becomes this kind of snowball of it slows the whole process of making sure that the benefits are verified before the patient's fully seen and all of that. And so then that starts to back up the doctor. So there's so many kind of butterfly effects that can happen from not getting that information prior to the patient showing up. And there's one other kind of scenario that we haven't brought up in that kind of journey even a little bit before that is, let's say a patient calls in and they schedule an appointment for 3 weeks. And let's say the staff is great, they verify the benefits at that time. But let's say in that 3 week period that the patient ran out of contacts, decided they need to immediately stop somewhere, bought contacts, use their benefit. Well, if the staff isn't re-verifying those benefits, before their appointment, let's say 24 hours before their appointment, those benefits could potentially change, and all they see is the initial one that they ran 3 weeks ago. And so then you're allowing patients to get more things on a benefit that you thought they had. And so there's a whole kind of host of complications there by not kind of re-verifying that benefit, day before the appointment or day of the appointment, however you want to do it.
Sure. So what I'm hearing in all of this is it really does tie back to those standard operating procedures, right? And I suppose what I'm hearing here are two things, right? Number one, gather as much information as the team can gather on that call with the patient, right? Gather as much information as possible. And number two, to be sure those benefits are pulled 24 hours prior. Now, at the same time that we're saying this as well, realizing that the advent of more and more patients also scheduling online means we need to be all the more kind of on top of these processes, right, to ensure that we're pulling all that info. So, really fascinating stuff, Nathan. But before we pivot here, because I definitely want you to share a little bit about where you saw the need in the industry and kind of like how PracticePal evolved and what it entails. But before we jump into that, any other best practices you would share as far as, again, our audience being doctors who are cold starting or purchasing a practice? For many of them, this is going to be their first time where they are really in charge of this stuff. So any closing words as far as the SOPs go?
Yeah, and I think it's really trying to encourage staff to, at those initial calls to schedule multiple appointments to, why they're verifying that initial patient. Go in, look at the rest of their family, look at their eligibility and say, oh, I see that your daughter and husband are also eligible. Would you like to go ahead and schedule them appointment? Because it's really, especially for the cold starts, you're building your brand and your image, and you're really wanting your patients to get in a habit of how you practice. And, if you start out saying, we recommend all kids be seen on a yearly basis and just you take care of, and they just think of it as like you take care of the whole family, because some patients just think the only time they need to see an eye doctor is because they can't see. And so if you get staff to kind of have that same message of, oh, Dr. McClain, really recommends, all kids be seen because of the changes that can take place, throughout growth and during school and all of these things, then it becomes a habit. And the more you can get your patient base and understanding that, the better. So it's really, I outside of maybe the optician itself, like the person on the phone was one of my most vital roles, because they're the gatekeeper for your practice. They control, who's coming in, who's going out. And so it's a very vital role, and they need to, I think, be well versed in the message that you are giving your patients in the exam room. And I learned that over time, that I was doing all these things and saying all these things in the exam room, but then I realized, like, I hadn't taught my staff that same message and that same kind of vibe we wanted for our practice. So I think that's really kind of a key component, is getting all staff on board with how you want to practice, and the message that you're giving in the patients in the exam room, you want them to be giving that message throughout that patient journey.
Love it. So much great stuff there. And I tell you something else you hit on, huge, two things. I mean, number one, being sure the team's aligned. And look, Dr. McClain, I think you and I both know we were having a conversation prior to going live here. I mean, there's so many facets of a practice where ensuring that the team is aligning with the vision and the approach that you, the doctor owner, have for the practice, right? But something else you touched on there as it pertains to our vision plan topic, and that is when your team is going in there and looking for benefits, right? Which again, very manual process, having to go to all these different portals, figure out what's what, but definitely to be sure they are also looking around for eligible family members that are in that group. So, well, Dr. McClain, really wonderful insights here as it pertains to standard operating procedures of working with vision plans. But let's shift gears now. And man, you got to share, tell us about what you're doing with PracticePal, because I will say, looking at the conventional standard operating procedure of working with vision plans compared to what you and your team have created in PracticePal, oh my gosh, it's absolutely amazing. So if you have a few more minutes, please do share with us a bit of where it originated, because we love hearing stories like that. But also tell us a little bit about the platform.
Yeah, it really started in around 2016 for me. I'd stepped away from seeing patients and was just managing the day-to-day operations of the practice. And in doing that, I really was able to monitor and see the day-to-day operations of my staff. And there was things that I knew were going on, talking about the verifying the benefits and all of these things that we've discussed today. And I knew they were going on, but I was too busy in the trenches to ever really think about it. I just had staff. I knew it was getting taken care of, so I thought everything was fine. Well, then, sitting there watching them answer the phone and the conversations and see how often they actually get the information on the phone, how often they don't, it became a big issue, like we've talked about. And so one of my big things was just how much wasted repetitive tasks the staff were doing in going to all the different portals, trying to find this information, trying to get it while on the phone. And so the first kind of part of what we created with PracticePal is a tool that goes out and simultaneously searches all the major vision payers. So with one search of just name and date of birth, we can go out and simultaneously search all the major vision payers and bring back that result for the member in a matter of seconds, so you can get it while on that call. And then the next big thing that we do is provide all dependents as well. So it makes that conversation very easy to say, oh, I also see that your daughter and husband are eligible as well. And one thing I found just in my own observations of my staff is staff are almost unmotivated to want to schedule multiple appointments because of the time it takes dealing in the portals. So
Sure.
they're like you said, especially in these cold starts, they're wearing multiple hats. You're on the phone, you see a patient walk up, and it's like, okay, I've got this patient verified. Do I try and verify, schedule the other family members? If there's 3 more family members, do I deal with the patient that's, sitting here in front of me? And so a lot of times it just gets skipped. And so with us providing all of that information in real time and it's at a glance, it just makes that conversation way more easy.
That's absolutely amazing. And I tell you, Dr. McClain, I mean, as you know, I've seen the saying, I'm very familiar with it, very familiar with the impact and results it can deliver to practices. It's fascinating stuff. So hey, for folks that want to learn more about vision plans, standard operating procedures, and certainly if folks want to learn more about PracticePal, demo the software, what have you, how can folks connect with you to continue the conversation?
Yeah, I mean, they can visit our website at www.practicepal.io. We actually have a demo that they can sign up for right on the spot to get a demo. And then also on there is a link to my email and everything. So if they want to visit the website or have any just questions, I'll gladly field them and love to help people wherever I can, especially the cold starts. It's pretty near and dear to me, and I know the struggles, but one of my favorite things about you is just your optimism and energy for the industry. So I think helping this next kind of generation of docs is a great thing.
Awesome. Well, Dr. McClain, that means a lot, man. Coming from someone like you, very influential leader across the industry. It's super awesome. So, Dr. Nathan McClain, thank you again for joining us here at the Cold Start Corner, talking about vision plans. For everyone out there, go check out PracticePal.io. Reach out to Dr. McClain with your questions. And if you're looking for more really awesome, practical cold start and purchase content like this, follow us on the socials, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and check out the Cold Start Corner at Akrinos.com for the latest updates. Dr. McClain, thanks so much, man. Have a great week.
Thanks a lot, Eric. Have a great week.